ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। ॐ अखण्डमण्डलाकारं व्याप्तं येन चराचरम् तत्पदं दर्शितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः. Shivam friends, as discussed, we will today take chapter 23 of Upasna Khand, and in this chapter there is a story of soul and mind, and this is the story of Virochana. He says that soul is the ruler and undefeatable minister is the mind. Now Virochana, that is Bali's father, is saying, "My son, somewhere in this universe there is an extensive country with a spacious sky whose ample space is able to hold thousands of worlds and many more spheres in it. It is without the wide oceans and seas and high mountains that are here on this earth. It has no forest, river, or lake, or any holy pilgrimage place as you see here below. There is no land or sky. There is no heavenly body in its sky, nor are there these suns and moons or the rulers of the spheres, or they are inhabitants of gods and demons. There are no races of yakshas and rakshasas, or those tribes of plants and trees, woods or grass, or the moving and immovable beings as you see upon the earth. There is no water, no land, no fire, and no air. There are no sides of the compass, no regions you call above or below. There is no light or shadow, nor are there any pupils, or the gods Vishnu, Indra, and Shiva, nor any of the lesser gods or demigods there. There is a great sovereign of that place who is full of indefinable light. He is the creator of all and pervades all and is all in all, but quite quiescent in all places and things. He elected a minister who was clever in administration, brought about what was impossible to be done, and prevented all mishaps from coming to pass. The minister neither ate or drank, nor did he know anything besides minding and doing his master's command. In all other respects, he was as inactive as a block of stone. He conducted every business for his minister, for his master, who remained quite retired from all business, enjoying his rest and ease in his seclusion and leaving all his concerns to be managed by his minister. Bali said, "Tell me, sage, what place is that which is devoid of all population and free from all disease and difficulty? Who knows that place and how can anyone reach it? Who is that ruler of sovereign power and who is that minister of so great might? Being quite apart from the world, is inseparably connected with it, and is invincible by our almighty demonic power. Tell me, O terror of the gods, this marvelous story of the great might of that minister in order to remove the cloud of doubt from my mind. Why he is unconquerable by us?" Virochan replied, "No, my son, this mighty minister cannot be overcome even by a gigantic force of asural giants. Even if they were aided by millions of demons fighting on their side, he is invincible, my son, by the god of a thousand eyes and also by the gods of riches and death, who conquer all. Neither immortals nor giants can ever overpower him by their might. All weapons are defeated in their attempt to hurt him. Swords, mallets, spears, bolts, discs, and cudgels hurled against him are broken to pieces as if striking against solid rock. He is unapproachable by missiles, invulnerable to arms and weapons, and cannot be taken by the dexterity of warriors. It is by his resistless might that he has brought gods and demigods under his subjection. It was he who defeated our forefathers, the mighty Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksh, before they were destroyed by the great Vishnu, who felled the giant Asuras like a storm breaks down sturdy and rock like oaks. The gods Narayan and others were all defeated by him and confined in their cells in the wombs of their mothers. It is by his favor that Kam, the god with his flower bow and 5 arrows, has been enabled to subdue and overcome the three worlds and boast of being their sole emperor. The gods and demigods, the intelligent and the foolish, the deformed and the irascible are all moved by his influence. The repeated wars between the gods and demons are the sports of this minister. The minister is only manageable by its lord, the silent soul, or else it is as dull as an immovable rock or restless as the wind. For the soul's advancement in spiritual knowledge, it feels a desire to subdue its minister, who otherwise is uncontrollable through lenient measures. You are said to be valiant if you can conquer this greatest of the giants in the three worlds, who has been worrying all people about out of their breath. After the rising of consciousness, the world appears as a flower garden, like a lake of blooming lotuses at sunrise. The setting of consciousness covers the world in darkness like at sunset. It is only by the aid of your intellect and by removal of your ignorance that you can subdue this minister and be famed for your wisdom. By subduing this minister, you become the conqueror of the world, though you are no victor of it. By not subjugating this minister, you can have no subjection over the world, though you may be the master of it. Therefore, to effect your perfect consummation and to secure your everlasting happiness, be diligent to overcome this minister by your best and most ardent exertions. It is easy for he who has been able to subdue this minister by his superior might to overcome the triple world and keep all its beings of gods and demons, the bodies of Naga and men, the races of Yaksh and Rakshas, and the tribes of serpents and kinners. So this was there in chapter 23. And in the next chapter 24, Virochan on mind control, hiring teachers, and practicing reason and detachment and realization. Bali said, Sage, tell me plainly, who is this minister that is so mighty? How can such a mighty being be defeated and brought under subjection? To this, Virochan replied, Though that minister is invincible and stands above all in his great might, yet I will tell you way in which he can be overcome by you or anyone else. Son, if you employ the proper means, it is easy to bring him under subjection. Otherwise, he will have the upper hand over you. like a snake's poison that is not timely repelled by efficacious mantras and incantations. The ministerial mind, if it is brought up like a boy in the right way, leads a man to the presence of the sovereign soul, like royal service advancing the civil servant before his king. The appearance of the master makes the minister disappear from sight, just as the disappearance of the minister brings one to the full view of his king. As long as one doesn't approach the presence of his king, he cannot fail to serve the minister. And as long as he is employed in service of the minister, he cannot come in sight of his king. The king being kept out of sight, the minister is seen to exercise his might. But the minister kept out of view, the king alone appears in full view. Therefore, must we begin with the practice of both these exercises at once, namely, approaching by degrees to the side of the king and gradually slighting the authority of the minister. You must use courageous and diligent effort for both these practices in order to arrive at the state of your well being. When you are successful in your practice, you are sure to reach that blissful country. Though you are a prince of the demons, nothing can prevent your entrance to it. That is a place where the blessed live, whose desires are at rest, and whose doubts are dissipated, and whose hearts are filled with perpetual joy and calmness. Now, my son, hear me explain what that place is, which I called a country. It is the seat of liberation, and where there is an end of all our pains. The king of that place is the soul of divine essence, which transcends all other substances. It is the soul that appoints the mind as its wise minister. The mind contains the ideal world in its bosom and exhibits its conscious form to the senses. Just as a clay mold for a pot in a model of the pot, and as smoke has the pattern of a cloud in its essence and represents its shadowy forms in the sky. Therefore, when the mind is conquered, everything is subdued and brought under subjection. But without adopting the proper means for its subjugation, the mind is invincible. Bali asked, Sage, how are we to quell the mind? Tell me plainly, so that I may use that method to conquer this invincible barrier to bliss. The Virochan answered, the means for subduing the mind are the lack of reliance or confidence in all external and sensible things, and the absence of all desire for temporal possessions. This is the best method to remove the great delusion of this world and to subdue the big elephant of the mind. This method is both very easy and practicable on one hand, as it is arduous and impracticable on the other hand. A constant habit of thinking so makes it easy, but lacking the habit renders it difficult. Gradual habit of renouncing our fondness for temporal objects shows itself in time in our resignation of the world. Just as continuous watering the roots of plants makes them grow into large trees. It is difficult to master anything, even by the most cunning, without proper cultivation over time. Just as it is impossible to reap a harvest from an unsown and uncultivated field. All embodied souls are destined to wander about the wilderness of the world, as long as their hearts do not surrender their attachments to the to the objects of sense in nature. Without the habit of apathy, it is impossible to have a distaste for sensible objects, just as it is impossible for an able bodied man to travel abroad by sitting motionless at home. The firm determination to abandon the entanglements of life and a habitual aversion to pleasures and enjoyments make a man advance to purity, just as a plant grows in open air to its full height. There is no good to be derived on earth without the exertion of one's courage. Man must give up his pleasure and the vexation of his spirit in order to reap the fruits of his actions. People speak of destiny as if it were a power, yet destiny has no shape or form. It means whatever comes to pass, and it is also called our lot or fate. The word destiny is also used by men to describe an accident over which they have no control and to which they submit with passive obedience. They use the word destiny to repress our joy and grief. But destiny, however fixed as fate, is overcome and set aside by means of courageous efforts. As the delusion of a mirage is dispelled by the light of its true nature, so courageous effort upsets destiny by effecting whatever it wishes to bring about. If we want to know what causes the good or bad results of our actions, we must learn that they turn as the mind wishes to mold them to being. Whatever the mind desires in decrease, the same becomes destiny. There is nothing destined in the ordinary sense of the word. It is the mind that does all this. The mind is the employer of destiny. The mind destines the destined acts of destiny. Life, the living soul, is spread out in the hollow sphere of the world like air in vacuum. The psychic fluid circulates through all space. Destiny is no reality, only a label invented to express the property of fixity, as the word rock is used to denote stability. Hence, as long as the mind retains its free will and activity, there is no fixed fate or destiny. After the mind is set at rest, there remains the principle of the living soul. This is called the embodied spirit, which is the source of the energies of the body and mind. Whatever the living soul intends to do by means of its spiritual force, the same comes to take place and nothing else. Reliance on this spiritual power will uproot your dependence on bodily food. There is no hope for spiritual happiness until there is distaste toward temporal enjoyments. It is hard to attain the dignity of all conquering self sufficiency as long as one has the dastardly spirit of his earthly cravings. As long as one is swinging in the cradle of worldly affairs, it is hard to find rest in the covered shelter of peaceful tranquility. It is hard to get rid of your serpentine desires without continued practice of detachment and unconcern with worldly affairs. Bali replied, "Tell me, O Lord of demons, How does indifference to worldly enjoyments take deep root in the human heart and produce the fruit of longevity of the embodied spirit on earth? Virochana replied, the sight of the inner spirit produces indifference to worldly things, just as the growth of vines produces grapes in autumn. The sight of the inner spirit produces our internal unconcern with the world, just as the glance of the rising sun infuses its brightness in the cup of the lotus. Therefore, sharpen your intellect with the whetstone of right reasoning. See the Supreme Spirit by withdrawing your mind from worldly enjoyments. There are two modes of intellectual enjoyment for those who are imperfect in their knowledge. One consists of book learning, the other is paying attention to the teacher's lectures. Those who are a little advanced in learning have the double advantage of their mental enjoyment, namely reflecting on book learning and consultation with wise teachers on practical points. Those who are accomplished in learning also have two parts of their duties, namely the profession of teaching the scriptures to others and the practice of detachment for themselves. The soul being purified, a man is fit for spiritual learning, as only clean linen is fit to receive every good color. Like a boy on the path of learning, the mind is to be restrained by degrees by means of persuasion and good lectures, and then by teaching scriptures, and lastly by discussion of their doctrines. After its perfection in learning and the dispersion of all difficulties and doubts, the mind shines like a piece of pure crystal and emits its brightness like cooling moonbeams. Then, by its complete knowledge and clear understanding, it sees in both its God, the Spirit, and its body as the seat of its enjoyments on earth. It constantly sees Spirit before it by means of its understanding and reason, which also help it relinquish its desire for worldly objects and enjoyments. The Spirit, the sight of the Spirit, eliminates desires, and the absence of desires brings the light of the Spirit to sight. Therefore, they are interrelated to each other like wick and oil produces lamp sight to dispel the night's darkness. After one loses his taste for worldly enjoyments, and after sight of the Supreme Spirit, the soul finds its perpetual rest in the essence of the Supreme Brahma. The living souls who place their happiness in worldly objects can never taste true joy unless they rely completely on the Supreme Spirit. It may be possible to derive some delight from acts of charity, sacrifices, and holy pilgrimage, but none of these can give the everlasting rest of the spirit. No one feels a distaste for pleasure unless he examines its nature and effects in himself. Nothing can teach the way of seeing the soul unless the soul reflects on itself. My boy, that which requires no effort to attain is of no good whatsoever. There is no true happiness without the surrender of earthly enjoyments. The supreme joy of resting in the state of Brahma cannot be found anywhere in creation, whether in this mundane sphere or anywhere else beyond these spheres. Therefore, always expect that your soul will find its rest in the divine spirit. Rely on the exertion of your courage and leave aside your dependence on the eventualities of destiny. A wise man detests all worldly enjoyments as if they are the strong bolts locking the door of bliss. It is the settled aversion to earthly pleasures that brings a man to his right reason. As the increasing gloom of rain clouds is followed by the serenity of autumn sky, so clear reasoning comes after detestations of enjoyments that flee with the advance of reason. As seas and clouds of heaven help one another by lending each other their waters, so right reasoning and apathy to pleasures tend to produce each other by turns. Disbelief in destiny and courageous efforts follow each another, as helping one another follows friendship. You must grit your teeth to create a distaste even for those things you acquired legally according to the customs of your country. First, you must acquire your wealth through courageous effort, then get good and clever men in your company by means of your wealth. Association with the wise by exciting the reasoning power produces an aversion to the sensual enjoyments of life, which in turn produces an increase of knowledge and learning. Thus, these lead gradually to the utter renunciation of worldly objects. Then, by means of your reasoning, you attain that supreme state of perfect rest and holiness of your soul. You will no longer fall into the mud of your misconceptions, but as a pure essence, you will not depend upon anything, and you will become as the venerable Shiva. Thus, the steps to attain perfection are first acquisition of wealth according to the customs of the caste and country, then its employment in the service of wise and learned men. Next follows your abandonment of the world, which is succeeded by your attainment of supreme spiritual knowledge by the cultivation of your reasoning powers. With this chapter 24 also comes to an end, and I will rest today's reading session here itself. This is completed with the grace of Lord Ram, and will again meet tomorrow for the reading of next chapters onwards. Until then, Shivoham, friends.